Hi thinkers, welcome to the ThinkX Academy. In this JavaScript playlist, we have already studied about functions and now we are going to move towards objects in JavaScript. So basically objects are very useful in JavaScript. When we are going to write complex programs, you will realize that the objects helps in maintaining the code and it also looks very neat. So we will discuss some of the things about objects and we will write the JavaScript program in the Visual Studio Code and we're going to see the output in the console, right? So let's start. First of all, objects are of two types. It can be a native object or it can be a user-defined object, right? So user-defined objects are those objects which we create. We means programmers create the program and they also create objects and they can name it as they want to. And basically the native objects are like string and array that we have previously discussed. So we are going to mainly focus on the user defined objects, which means that we are going to create our objects here. So let's start with the object creation. So first of all, I will write a comment here that we're going to start with the user defined objects, and you can see the whole code that I'm going to write here. You can also see it in the Android application. The link is given in the description, right? So first of all, I'm going to create a object which I will call it as a student. And the way to create an object in JavaScript is very simple. You just need to use the new operator and then use the object keyword and circular brackets, right? So this is how we can create an object in the uh, in JavaScript, and this object is basically used for different purposes. We can assign some of the properties to this object. For example, a student can have roll number, marks, and various things. We can also assign some of the parameters, or let's say functions, which basically are used to define the functionality of what that object can do. For example, we will create a function which will be able to fetch the details of the student, right? So let's move further. So let's see how to assign the properties of the student object. It is very simple. Let's say we want to create a marks property. So I will use student dot operator marks, and let's say the marks of the student is 100. Now let's define some more properties, like let's say name, right? Let's create one more last property, which is the roll number. We will have to use the dot operator to assign the properties, and let's say the roll number is 1 here. So now you can see I've created three properties of this object student, and you can see how it makes the code very simple. We do not need to create marks, roll number, and name of we do not need to maintain various variables. So we can use an object, and under that same object we can define various properties, right? So that helps a lot in maintaining the complexity of programs. So this is how we can create the properties. Now let's see how we can create functions of this whole object. So I'm going to create a function. Let's say the name of the function is fetch details. We have already studied about the about functions in this playlist, and this function, what it is going to do is in the console it is going to print the name of the student and the marks and the roll number, right? So name of the student can be given by student dot name, like this, right? Similarly, we are going to write the marks and the roll number of the student. We're just going to display this, and remember this is inside of the function fetch details. So here I will write roll number and here it will be marks, right? So this is the function fetch details we have created. Now what we are going to do is we are going to create a function which we will assign to the student object, right? So let's say the name of the function is details, right? So student dot details, and we are going to reference it to this function that we have created, which is the fetch details function. So now we have attached a function, details, and three properties to this object. So basically objects are real life. It is just like real life objects. For example, let's say if we have some object, it can have some properties like if we consider a car, it has properties like color and various models and everything, and it also has some functionality. So properties and functionalities are the main reason why we create object. And now since we have created an object, we can see how to access the properties by using the dot operator. And in this way we can create the functions inside of our object, right? So this is the fetch details function, and this details is the actual function. Now, in order to call this function, let's see how to call this function, and let's see what will happen when we call this function. In order to make a function call, we know we will have to use the circular brackets. So if I will just save this, you can see after saving, since we are using the live server, that then by just saving, we will be able to see the result in the console, right? So the name is Vishal, marks is 100, and roll number is 1. So you can see that this details function is being called, and it displays the name, marks, and roll number of this student. So that's the very simple way how we can create user defined objects. Now there is one more important concept in objects, which is that objects are reference types. Right, so objects are reference types. So let us first understand what is the meaning of reference, right? Because it is very important and we're going to use it in the future tutorials also. And almost in every programming language references are used. So let's see how we can how objects are reference types, right? So let's say I will simply create a variable which is a x variable, and let's create one more variable which is y, and I will assign this variable x to the variable y. So you can see the value of x is 10. When we assign value of y equals to x, the value of y will be 10, right? So if I will write console.log, and if I will print the value of y here, you can see the value of y is 10. Now let's say what will happen if I will change the value of x equals to 3 at this step here. Now in the first line x is equal to 10. In the second we have assigned the value of y as x, and then x has changed the value from 10 to 3. Now my question is that if we will change the value of x equals to 3, will it also change the value of y? So console.log y will give me 3 or 10. So the answer is that it will give me 10 only. So if we will save, you can see the answer is still 10, because x and y, these are the primitive types. Primitive types. So because they are the primitive types, the value of x is copied to the value of y, and if in the future you try to change the value of x, it will not impact the value of y. If it will impact the value of y, if let's say I'm in the future I'm changing the value of x and it also changes the value of y, we call it as reference types, right? So what we are doing is we are creating a reference to the original uh, variable, and even if we change, whenever we will change the value of that variable, it will reflect in the whole program. So since x and y here, they are primitive types, not the reference types, the value of y is not going to change in this scenario. So let's take a look at objects and let's see, will it change in case of object? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another student, which is the student 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign it as the student, right? So just like x equals to 10, right? We have, let's say x is student, so the student is the object, We have initialized the object, then y equals to x, right? Y equals to x is this line. We have created y as student2, which has been assigned the value of x. Now, if I try to change, let's try to change some of the properties. Let's try to change the marks of student, right? I will reassign the marks of student as 90. So you can see in the future, when we tried to change the value of x, it did not impacted the value of y. But in case of objects, if we try to change the value of student, it will impact the value of student here also, and the value of student2 dot marks will also become 90, right? So let me write console.log and let's try to print the value of student2 dot marks. If I will save this, you can see the value is 90 here. Originally, the student dot marks was equals to 100. And since the objects are reference types, it means that in the future, if you try to change the value of student, it will also get changed in all the codes here, right? So because they are referencing, referencing means they are pointing to that particular position. So one important thing that I forgot to mention is that whenever you create an object, it is allocated inside the memory, right? It is allocated inside memory, and when we are talking about memory, we are talking about RAM also, only because the CPU accesses the memory and this object gets initialized inside of the memory. And then after this, so since we have allocated it inside the memory, here you can see when I try to change the value of student dot marks, the student2 is also is not initialized. You can see the student2 is not another object, but it is just pointing to the student object. So student object has the values marks equals to 100, name equals to Vishal, roll number equals to 1. So the student 2 here is not a new object, but it is actually pointing to this particular object, right? So whatever values we will change in case of student, it will also change the values in the student 2. That's why you're seeing 90 has been changed of the student dot marks. So the student 2 dot marks is also 90. That's the main behind the scenes implementation of how referencing works inside of JavaScript and in case of objects, right? So that's all for this tutorial. Thanks for watching.